I'm Lauren Brooks, 31 years old, and I grew up in a historic mansion perched atop a hill in Greenwich, Connecticut, a place where cocktail parties mattered more than family dinners. To outsiders, my family was the blueprint of high society. My father, Preston Brooks, ran a well-known venture capital firm in Manhattan. My mother, Evelyn, was once a 90s magazine cover model who later moved into hosting upscale charity galas for museums. But behind those massive mahogany doors, our home was so cold it made New England winters feel bearable. I used to count the days until I could leave that house. Even as a child, I knew I wasn't a priority. My parents weren't the type to yell. They simply didn't care. I still remember my 12th birthday vividly, waiting all afternoon with a homemade cake slowly going stale in the kitchen, only to get a call from my mother's assistant. Mrs. Evelyn sends her best, and a gift is on its way. The gift was a designer purse I never dared to use. It felt as cold as the person who sent it. They never asked what I wanted. They only needed me to look perfect beside them at public events. Dress appropriate, hair pinned, smile polite. The rest of their time was spent elsewhere. Asset rankings, photo ops with dignitaries, or ski vacations in Gstaad I was never invited to. I can't recall a single time my father took me to the park or my mother sat with me when I had a fever. They always had a reason. Your father's closing an 8-figure deal, or mommy has to fly to San Francisco for an exhibition. Over time, I learned to take care of myself, and to stop expecting anything from the people who brought me into this world. The only person who ever made me feel like I mattered was my grandfather, Bernard Whitmore. He was the only man in the family who didn't care about leather wallets or Swiss watches. He wore plaid shirts, drove an old pickup truck, and carried a dented thermos everywhere. Instead of taking me to luxury malls, he'd bring me to the lake behind his house, teaching me how to fish, how to camp, and how to read the water for signs of rain. You don't have to be like them, Lauren, he'd say in his deep, slow voice. Money isn't what makes you valuable, it's how you treat people that counts. I lived by those words more than he probably ever realized. Every summer, I'd beg my parents to let me stay with him in Vermont. They rarely said no, probably relieved to be free of parental duties for a few months. Those days on his farm were the only time I felt like myself. I wore old t-shirts, went barefoot, and fell asleep in the pine-scented barn. He let me flip through his lifelong collection of journals, hundreds of pages filled with short stories about nature, work, and lessons learned through failure. No one else in the family ever read them. To them, he was just the eccentric old man, the one who sold off the massive construction company he built from nothing, choosing instead a quiet mountain life. But to me, he was a universe unto himself, a place where kindness wasn't weakness, but the most precious inheritance of all. I used to think that if I studied hard, behaved properly, and stayed out of trouble, my parents would eventually notice me. But when I graduated from Cornell University with honors in environmental science and visual arts, all my mother asked was, "So what are you planning to do with that wilderness degree?" My father didn't even try to hide his disappointment. He had already mapped out my path, start in the PR department at Brooks Capital, then gradually trained to sit at the big table. But I refused, over dinner at the Arlington Club where he was a founding member. As he poured red wine from a bottle worth nearly $1,000, I said it clearly. I'm not working for Brooks Capital. I've received a fellowship from the Global Conservation Fund. I'm going to South Africa. No one moved for 10 seconds. Go where? My mother asked, as if I had just declared I was moving in with aliens. South Africa. Kruger Park. They're running a native lion conservation program. I'll be there for 6 months as a photographer and research associate. My father set down his glass, his face tightening like carved marble. Lauren, you're turning down a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity just to take pictures of animals? No, sir. I'm choosing to do something that matters to me. Wonderful, my mother whispered, ice sharp. You'll sleep in tents, eat bugs, and come back with sunburn and a resume no one wants to touch. Enjoy your little wild life, my father said as he stood leaving his dinner untouched. That was the day I officially left the Brooks family, in both body and spirit. I moved in with my best friend, Jenna Clark, into a 2-bedroom apartment in South Brooklyn. We'd met during sophomore year, bonded over our love for cameras, nature, and the occasional rule-breaking. Jenna had quit a corporate law job to pursue street photography, and she was also the first person to drive me out for waffles at midnight when I broke down after my mother yelled at me in the middle of Madison Avenue. We didn't have much. I drove an old Subaru my grandfather gave me, carried 2 cameras, 3 lenses, and a camping kit I cherished more than any handbag. Every morning, I'd wake up early, ride my bike out to the marshes outside the city to shoot flamingos and catfish. On weekends, I helped Jenna edit wedding photos or cut videos for grassroots environmental groups. We lived off freelance income but never once felt lacking. You know, Jenna said one night while we sat curled up on the balcony watching the city lights flicker, your mom probably thinks you've lost it, but honestly, I'd rather be friends with a girl who can trap flamingos in fog than one who shops all day on Fifth Avenue. I smiled, cupping my tea, feeling warmth settle in my chest, but not everyone supported my choices. Old acquaintances whispered that I was running from family duty. Relatives sent emails asking, "Are you sure you're okay living like a nomad?" My parents ignored me entirely, until I appeared on an international conservation feature for a photo series documenting endangered elephants in Mozambique. That's when I got the first phone call from my father in nearly a year. "Lauren, the media's watching. You need to be careful about what you say on camera. Everything affects the family's reputation." I paused for a moment before answering. "I don't represent the family, sir. I represent myself and the creatures who can't speak for themselves." Then I hung up. Jenna was in the kitchen and heard every word. She looked up and said, "Next time he calls, ask if he wants to wire transfer something to the elephants." I laughed, but deep down, I knew they weren't done. To my parents, anything outside their control was a threat, and my decision to live simply, intentionally, and authentically was the greatest threat they had ever faced. I was in Namibia filming a herd of rare antelopes sprinting across the sunset when I got a call from Grandpa's longtime physician, Dr. Harold. His voice lacked its usual calm. "Lauren, Bernard's just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. We don't have much time." I could hear the wind hissing through my headphones, but inside me was absolute stillness. No tears, no screams, just one thought. I have to go home. The flight took more than 20 hours through 3 layovers and a mild storm in Lisbon. When I finally stepped into Vermont, a thin layer of snow blanketed the ground. Grandpa's farm looked just as it had the last time I left. Dark slate roof, chimney puffing smoke, and the row of white daisies by the fence still standing, even though winter had swallowed nearly all signs of life. Bernard was lying on his old brown recliner, ice lighting up when I walked in. "You made it," he said, his voice rough like sandpaper. "You look like you just argued with the entire JFK terminal." I smiled. "And you look like you just outran death in a marathon." "Where are your parents?" he asked, though his eyes already held the answer. I shook my head slightly. "They're in Palm Beach." "Looks like you're a lower priority." He shrugged. "That's their choice. Not your fault." And just like that, I moved back to the farm. There was a daytime nurse, but I handled everything else. I learned to read his face when he was too tired to speak, how to help him stand without hurting his weakened back. I made tomato soup the way he used to for me when I was little. We sat for hours in silence, listening to the fireplace crackle. One night when the snow fell so hard the phone lost signal, he called me to his bed. "Lauren," he said, "there's something you need to know." I sat by the edge, held his hand. "I'm listening." He looked at me for a long time, like he was weighing something heavier than any secret he'd ever carried. "Do you remember when you were little? I told you justice doesn't always come from a court but from choices." I nodded. I've updated my will. My brows furrowed. You changed the heir? I changed, corrected. He coughed a bit, then continued. Your father, Preston, borrowed nearly $5 million from my company through representation expenses that were never approved. I didn't sue because I'm his father, but I can't let him think he's entitled to everything as a reward for his greed. I felt my heartbeat slow. So what are you leaving me? He smiled. It's not about what I'm leaving. It's about who I trust. You're the only one in this family who never asked how much money I had. You only asked if I was feeling okay. I couldn't say anything. You'll receive most of the liquid assets, cash, shares, trust funds. Your parents will receive symbolic portions. I don't want them to starve, but I also won't let them continue living under the illusion that inheritance is a birthright. My throat tightened. They're going to go ballistic. Yep, he sighed. And that's why I need you to be strong. My lawyer, Mr. Kleeman, has arranged everything, but the hard part is what comes after. What part? The part where you have to decide whether to forgive or not. I let out a sad laugh. I'm not sure forgiveness will be my first choice. It's okay. I just need you not to lose yourself when you face them, because they'll come for you. They'll do everything they can to take back what they think is theirs. I sat there long after he fell asleep. The soft yellow lamp lit his face like an old photograph. I wasn't afraid of the money. I was afraid of the loneliness it would bring. But I also knew if he trusted me this much, I couldn't back down. And I was right, because 2 weeks later, he passed away. And 6 days after that, I received an official letter summoning me to the will reading at Mr. Clayman's law office. The note stated clearly, mandatory attendance may affect inheritance rights. I arrived at Attorney Clayman's office at 840 am Main, 20 minutes before the will reading, but the elegant oak-paneled conference room was already packed. Familiar faces. The holiday family, as I called them. Relatives who only showed up for Christmas or Thanksgiving if cameras or expensive gifts were involved. My parents sat in the front row. My mother, Evelyn, was flawless as ever. Platinum curls perfectly coiffed, high-neck Chanel dress, a cloud of perfume thick enough to fill the room. She glanced at me as I walked in, ice as cold as a barcode scanner on a defective item. My father didn't look at me. He was whispering to Uncle Blake, his younger brother who'd been cut from the company by Grandpa for expense fraud. I sat at the end of the table next to Attorney Clayman, who had worked with my grandfather for over 3 decades. He gently placed a hand on the dark leather folder, looked around the room, and spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. The will was officially signed, witnessed, and notarized 12 days before Mr. Bernard Whitmore passed. The entire content will be read aloud in full with no provisions omitted. Let us begin. The first parts went as expected. The longtime gardener received $25,000. Grandpa's private physician got a restored vintage car. A portion of antiques was donated to the Vermont State Museum. No major reactions until Clayman paused, turned a page, and his voice dropped slightly. As for the principal estate, this includes liquid cash, shares in Whitmore Group, and legal usage rights to the Green Hill Mansion. I will now read the next clause. I could feel every eye in the room turn toward him. The primary beneficiary of all liquid assets, totaling $18.50 million to be distributed across 3 personal trust funds with full controlling rights, is my granddaughter, Lauren Elaine Brooks. The room felt like the air had been sucked out. I heard nothing but the pounding of my own heartbeat. Clayman went on, his tone steady. The rationale is detailed in a handwritten letter from Mr. Bernard, included with the will, to be delivered privately to Miss Lauren. Again, 3 independent trust funds, established at 3 different banks, totaling nearly $18.5 million, have been legally transferred and do not require approval from any other family members. A loud crash. My father shot up from his chair, sending it slamming into the wall behind him. This is outrageous. This is a mistake, he shouted, his face flushing like I'm Bernard's only son. I'm the rightful heir to this estate. Clayman responded calmly, Mr. Bernard had full legal authority to designate beneficiaries. These decisions were made after careful consideration over several months, with documentation confirming his full mental competence at the time of signing. I felt my mother stir. She rose and approached me, trying to force a gentle expression, though her lips quivered slightly. Lauren, if something's not right, you can still claim and interrupt it. I'll now read the provisions for Mr. Preston Brooks and Mrs. Evelyn Brooks. I looked at my parents, they held their breath. Mr. Bernard leaves the two of you a sum of $120,000 under one condition: the entire physical estate at the Green Hill property, including the main house, guest house and surrounding land, shall be transferred into a separate asset trust fully controlled by Lauren. You have 30 days to arrange your departure from the premises. My mother nearly collapsed. What? She gasped. That's our home. We've lived there for almost 20 years. No, Clayman replied, still polite but firm. The property was always in Mr. Bernard's name. He permitted your residence free of charge. That arrangement is no longer in effect. My father gripped the chair arm so tightly the veins stood out under his pale skin. This isn't over. I'll sue. Mr. Bernard, anticipate any legal disputes, Clayman said, looking directly at my father as if Bernard himself were in the room. Any attempts to contest the will activate the forfeiture clause. All remaining assets will be frozen and transferred to a legal protection charity. Once again, silence blanketed the room. I didn't know whether to cry, scream or flee. But when Clayman turned to hand me a thick sealed envelope, placing his hand lightly over mine, I suddenly remembered Grandpa's words. You don't have to fight to receive it, Lauren. You just have to be strong enough to hold on when everything starts to collapse. And that was happening faster than I imagined. 3 days after the will reading, I returned to the Green Hill estate to gather some of Grandpa's personal belongings left in the library. The house was eerily quiet, not from lack of people, but from his absence. I was sitting in his old reading chair, flipping through letters he had written to Grandma Rose, his wife who'd passed 15 years ago, when the library door swung open. My father entered first. My mother followed closely behind. They didn't look like they came for a civil conversation. Mom still wore her brown leather gloves, something she kept on even when unnecessary, just to project control. Dad didn't smile. He looked at me like I was a rival, not his daughter. We need to talk, he said, shutting the door. This can't go on any longer. I placed the letters down and stood up. If you're here to discuss moving arrangements, I can ask the lawyer to assist. Don't give us that moral high ground crap, Mom snapped. You sat there while your parents were humiliated in front of relatives and a bunch of lawyers, like we were beggars. I didn't write the will, I replied, calmer than I expected, and I'm not the one who lost Grandpa's trust. We're not here to argue, my father cut in. We're here to offer a solution. Sounds dangerous already, I smirked. Go ahead. You give us $10 million, he said bluntly. We need it to sort out a few financial matters. You keep the rest. That's my inheritance, not a pool to be split up by who needs what. We're family, my mother nearly hissed. Family helps each other. Or do you think you're above everyone now, just because you got a few numbers in a bank account? I looked at them for a long time, then said slowly, all I ever wanted was for you to see me as someone who mattered, not just as a wallet. My father moved quickly to the desk, grabbing the sealed envelope Clayman had given me after the will reading. I hadn't opened it yet. I wanted to wait for a quieter moment. That moment was gone. Give that back, I said through gritted teeth. He pulled out a check. It clearly read, Whitmore Trust, pay to the order of Lauren Elaine Brooks, $18,500,000. My mother stood beside him, pulling from her coat pocket a familiar silver lighter, an heirloom from my grandmother she carried like a talisman. This isn't a joke, I stepped forward. The funds have already been transferred. That check is just symbolic. Everything's already in the accounts. Burning it won't undo anything. And you won't mind if we make this disappear? Mom sneered, lighting the flame. Dad held the check high. Transfer the money. Or watch this turn to ash, he said, each word deliberate. I took a breath, fists clenched. Go ahead. I bet Grandpa would rise from the grave just to applaud. They didn't hesitate. My father held the check over the flame. My mother kept the lighter steady like she was warming an afternoon tea oven. The paper caught quickly, curling, blackening, turning to ash in under 10 seconds. No one said anything. Until I laughed. Laughed loud. Laughed so hard I cried. That's rich, I gasped. You two really think burning a check gives you the money back? Stop pretending, my mother snapped. No check, no proof. Clayman will have to issue another, this time to someone who deserves it. I unlocked my phone, tapped a few times, and held the screen toward them. This is the first account. $7,3 million. The other two are being managed by 3 separate financial advisors. All vetted by Clayman. The check you just burnt was a ceremonial duplicate. And it had RFID tagging. My father froze. I continued, voice as soft as winter wind. Clayman warned me. If that check is destroyed, the system alerts him immediately. He might be on his way now. Right then, the estate gate bell rang. I glanced at the security feed. A car from Clayman's office was parked in the driveway. A man in a gray coat stepped out with 2 security personnel. I looked my parents straight in the eye. Game's over. My mother turned pale. My father's breath grew short. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them. The heavy wooden door clicked sharply as Mr. Clayman entered, followed by 2 security staff in slate blue uniforms bearing the law office's emblem. His face wasn't angry, but his eyes cut like knives. Mr. Preston, Mrs. Evelyn, he said, voice calm and even, but enough to make my parents snap around as if yanked by an invisible string. I just received an alert from the RFID system embedded in the inheritance check. The fire sensor was triggered within the past 4 minutes. My father swallowed hard. That check was just paper. It held no legal value. We were only testing a reaction, my mother cut in, trying to force a polite smile. We were afraid Lauren might be taken advantage of, so we acted out of concern. Deliberately attempting to destroy assets governed by a will constitutes legal obstruction, Mr. Clayman interrupted, not even glancing at her. But unfortunately, that's not the most serious matter. I stood frozen, the air thick and heavy as if time had stopped. But Mr. Clayman pressed on. Mr. Bernard granted me full emergency authority if any threat arose to the beneficiary or his estate. And he left a sealed file, to be opened only in the event that either of you attempted unauthorized interference with his assets. I saw my father take a small step back. My mother began speaking faster, barely containing panic. We never intended to interfere. We're family. We just thought Lauren was too young to handle so much. Mr. Clayman opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick document folder clipped inside a red plastic cover labeled confidential, not executive only. Since 2012, he said, Mr. Preston repeatedly withdrew funds exceeding Whitmore Group's operating budget without board approval. The total documented is over $6.80 million, including property in the Bahamas, memberships at 3 elite golf clubs, and personal credit card payments, all filed under representation expenses. My father turned pale. Those were legitimate. I had verbal approval from my father to draw advances. Verbal agreements aren't recorded in accounting records, Clayman replied flatly. Here are the statements, digitally signed, and the withdrawals coincide with periods of Whitmore Group's liquidity crises. My mother tugged at my father's arm, but he shoved her hand away. An independent audit also flagged signs of fraud, Clayman continued, flipping another page, including shell companies used to route funds as consulting expenses, which were then spent on yachts and personal stock investments. Mr. Bernard knew all of it, but he chose not to expose it because he hoped Mr. Preston would change. I looked at my father. He no longer looked like the powerful man in a gray suit who once terrified me as a child. Now he was a shadow sinking into his own quicksand. "Oh, so what? Do you want now?" my mother whispered. "I don't represent the criminal prosecution," Clayman replied, his eyes flicking to me, then settling on my father. "But if there is any further attempt to intimidate, threaten, or manipulate Lauren, I will forward this entire file to the state attorney's office." He nodded to the two security guards. "Per Clause 42 of the will, I must inform you, you have 12 hours from now to vacate the Green Hill estate. After that point, any unauthorized presence will be subject to legal enforcement." "You can't," my mother burst into tears. "This is my home. I've lived here over 20 years. "No, it was Mr. Bernard's home," Clayman said. "And now it belongs to Lauren. Your stay was a courtesy. That courtesy has ended." My father said nothing. He turned away, his eyes never meeting mine. I stood there long after they were gone. The ticking of the antique clock in the living room echoing like a metronome. Mr. Clayman approached me. "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath. I don't know, I should feel triumphant. But I just feel tired. He nodded. "You just stepped out from under a shadow most people never face in a lifetime. Feeling tired is normal." I clenched my hands, staring out the back window toward the garden where Grandpa once taught me how to grow tomatoes and tell the difference between herbs and weeds. I whispered more to myself than anyone. Now it's my turn to protect what he left behind. Not just the money, the integrity. I start each morning at Green Hill Estate by drawing open all the tall glass curtains facing east, where sunlight pours through the birch trees into what used to be my grandfather's reading room. Now officially the headquarters of the Whitmore Conservation Foundation. The name wasn't chosen at random. It's how I keep a promise to him to preserve what he believed was worth protecting. Not long after my parents were expelled from the estate, I sat down with Mr. Clayman and the finance team to go over the 3 trust funds. One of them had a special clause written by my grandfather himself. All revenue from the commercial real estate investments in Seattle would be directed toward nonprofit initiatives under my leadership. As long as their mission focused on nature conservation, environmental education, or rural community development, it took me 1 week to absorb it all and another 3 weeks to complete the formal proposal. By the 4th week, the Whitmore Conservation Foundation was officially born with its own tax ID, bank accounts, website, and a mission statement I typed with the same hands that once photographed elephants on the Kenyan plains. The first person I called was Jenna Clark. She arrived with a bag of homemade waffles and 2 HR binders. "I'm ready to quit all the wedding shoots and save the dates," Jenna said, flopping into a chair like she ran the world, "as long as I get to do something that actually means something." We started small, supporting a forest restoration study group in Maine, funding an environmental summer camp for students in the Appalachian region, and partnering with a nonprofit in New Hampshire to protect the declining snowy owl population. Green Hill Estate, once a fortress of silent Christmases, became a real place of activity. The main dining room turned into our conference space, the backyard greenhouse was restored to grow herbs and fresh vegetables for team lunches, and my grandfather's library, with its hundreds of journals and field notes, became the heart of our strategy. I also invited a few former colleagues from my time in Africa. One of them was Alex Mason, an American ecologist who once led a giraffe tracking project in Namibia. We used to argue fiercely over using drones to monitor wildlife, but we also survived a 3-day sandstorm together. He accepted the role of scientific advisor without hesitation. I still have that rain jacket I borrowed from you in Okavango, Alex grinned on his first visit. Time to pay it back. I laughed, but something inside me felt unexpectedly warm. The first project I led personally was the Connecticut River Biological Corridor, a region of over 1,290 acres of riverside land at risk of being sold for development. We successfully bid on 3 major parcels and began restoring native forest using red maple and white oak. Each day I walked through the reclaimed woods with the research team, documenting progress with my camera, then editing images at night for grant reports. On rainy days with mud soaking my ankles, I still feel alive, truly alive, in a place once filled with silence, money, and impossible expectations. What I didn't expect was that the photos I posted of the regenerating forest caught the attention of the nature photography community. A week later, Nature Lens magazine reached out for an interview, and by the end of the month we were invited to present at the 47th Northeast Conservation Conference. It was there I unveiled our signature initiative, the Whitmore Fellowship, an annual $250,000 scholarship for environmental biology students from underserved backgrounds. I stood on stage, behind me a slide of Grandpa smiling, with his worn-out notebook in hand, and said, "My grandfather used to tell me, you don't need to stand out, just stand where you believe you're needed." Now it's my turn to pass that on to young people searching for hope in a world that desperately needs it. As I stepped off the stage, Alex caught me in the hallway and whispered, "Mr. Bernard is definitely smiling from above." I nodded, but deep down I knew he hadn't just left me financial legacy, he had handed me a mission, and I was slowly bringing it to life. A new chapter of the Whitmore family was being written, this time in leaves, soil, and things that money can't buy. Just 6 months after Green Hill Estate became the official headquarters of the Whitmore Conservation Foundation, I received a handwritten letter, a rarity in the age of email. It was from my mother. The paper carried the scent of old perfume, the handwriting round and careful like when she used to pen Christmas cards for my father's clients. The letter wasn't long, but clearly deliberate. She wrote that they were undergoing financial restructuring, that they were no longer living in the luxury Back Bay apartment, and were now renting a modest place near Cambridge. She said, "Your father is trying to return to work, but his health isn't what it used to be," and closed with one heartbreaking line, "If you find it in yourself to open your heart again, I believe we can still find common ground." They respond right away. I folded the letter and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, beside my grandfather's old field journals on wintering birds. 3 days later, they showed up. No warning, no appointment. I was with Jenna inspecting soil samples at our forest trial site when Evelyn walked in, holding a small box of muffins, something she had never baked in her life. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked, trying to sound calm, but her hand clutched the bag handle so tightly it turned white. My father trailed behind, his back more hunched, his hair grayer, and his eyes no longer carried that familiar edge of disdain. I brought them into the small guest room, the one I usually reserved for journalists or fundraising partners. No classical music, no candle wax scent, just the wind rustling through the large window panes. "We didn't come to ask for anything," my father said, opening the conversation. "We just wanted to talk as a family." I said nothing. I just listened. They shared that he was now a teaching assistant at a community college, a modest but steady job. My mother was working as a coordinator at a senior care center, something I could hardly imagine her agreeing to. They didn't mention money or property, just memories of me, Grandpa, and the things they claimed to finally understand. I sat in silence for a long time before I replied, "I don't hate you. I just don't want to live inside the cycle of control and pretense anymore." "We've changed," my mother whispered. "Maybe not enough, but we want to try." I made no promises. I just said, "I'll think about it." After that day, they didn't reach out again, and I knew. This time, it wasn't out of anger. It was because they understood the power dynamic had shifted. Meanwhile, the foundation was thriving. We secured funding from 3 international organizations, successfully protected nearly 3,000 acres of forests in northern Vermont, and were preparing to open the Bernard Whitmore Experimental Biology Center, an expanded research and learning site built on the same land where my grandfather once grew corn as a young man. At the project launch, I stood beside someone I never expected to enter my life, like a soft breeze. Dr. Miles Cartwright, an ecology professor from Dartmouth. We met at a rewilding conference, where he openly challenged my keynote address in front of the entire hall. But instead of being offended, I found him during the break, and we talked until the lights went out. Our exchanges turned into research collaborations, then late-night calls, impromptu hikes, and long silences filled with quiet understanding. What do you think your grandfather would say about us turning his old cornfield into an amphibian research center? Miles asked as we stood in the middle of the construction site. I laughed. He'd probably clear his throat and say, "At least they didn't turn it into a golf course." On opening day, I wore an olive green dress, no designer labels, no jewelry, just a small pin. My grandfather's, the one he wore when receiving his honorary degree from his alma mater. As I stepped onto the stage, with the foundation's emblem behind me and more than 100 guests before me, I didn't see my parents. But when the ceremony ended, as I was accepting flowers from our young research team, I saw them, standing quietly at the edge of the field. They didn't come forward, but they were there. I didn't wave. I didn't look away. I simply nodded. A nod that said everything. Forgiveness with conditions. Communication with boundaries. But growth doesn't need permission. I'm Lauren Brooks. I used to be called the disrespectful daughter. Now I'm the one redefining loyalty, legacy, and family, through everything they never taught me. Lauren Brooks' story is proof that sometimes betrayal and greed aren't the end, but the beginning of an awakening. When we release the need for validation from those who never earned it, we begin building a life rooted in our true values. Lauren didn't just inherit wealth, she inherited wisdom, compassion, and the courage to create a new legacy. Not through money, but through intentional kindness and lasting impact. What do you think of Lauren's choices? Would you have done the same in her place? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, choices, and the meaning of life.